I was very interested in the director's remarks because you really hit it in terms of when autonomous vehicles are coming, and eventually they will be here. The right approach is to deal with people in needs, in microtransit, equity, people with disabilities, transit deserts. So I think you hit all the right points. You've delivered a part of my presentation. So thank you very much on that. I do have a presentation about 15 or 20 minutes, and if you'd like at the end, it's up to you. I have one slide on congestion pricing in New York, if that's of interest to how it might affect North Jersey. The book, No One at the Wheel, I'll just do a little excerpts of it on it, but the original working title on this was Autonomous Vehicles, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And they're all possibilities, and that's where you come in. You can help make the good happen, or if we rely solely on the private sector, I'm worried that the bad or the ugly may in fact happen. So the good is when we share the autonomous vehicles, when they're really part of transit as opposed to individual ownership. The good is when we integrate it with transit systems. And under the good, you will see congestion can diminish. Crashes, injuries, deaths plummet. The equity that the executive director spoke about could be achieved, less pollution, smaller carbon footprint, and solving the last mile, which I think in North Jersey is very important, but is important in so many other communities. But there is also a possibility that we're going to make mistakes going forward, and I'm worried about that. And in the bad, we still have the shared autonomous vehicles, but we compete with transit. And we see traffic miles soar, congestion soars, jobs disappear, pedestrians, lots of the progress. And I heard both the chairman, the executive director, speaking about complete streets. Many of the progress that we see could end up being squeezed out on that and become unaffordable. We may forget a number of our people, the low-income people and rural dwellers, and competing with existing transit. The ugly could be quite ugly with widespread gridlock. Public transportation gets decimated. Heart disease, stroke, inactivity disease soar, and everybody gets a license, even your dog. And a new modernist view of cities that says cities are for the autonomous vehicles, they're not for people. And we saw that in the 1920s. I won't go too much into that history, where people thought cities were for cars, not for people, and there was a major change. So today, I'll just talk about one excerpt of the book and some of the later findings, and that is truth versus hype. What you're hearing most likely when you read something in the media or hear something, it is hype. It is the industry promoting only like the private sector could do to essentially say, throw money at me, I've got the answer. And so you will hear people making incredible promises. Elon Musk is certainly one of those. He's not shy. Every year, I could put this up, we're less than 2 years away from complete autonomy. At the beginning of this year, he said, no question about it, full autonomy by the end of the year. Next year, he will be saying the same thing. In 2017, when I started working on the book, most people in the industry would say autonomous vehicles are 2 years away. In 2019, most people in the industry say it's 5 or more years away. So the math doesn't quite work out there. And then lots of quotes by people who are in the industry. Level 5, which is the car you get into, no steering wheel, no brake, no acceleration, no pedal. You just get into it and it takes you anywhere you want to go. A lot of people think that that's not going to happen. You won't be able to have a vehicle that can do everything, take you everywhere, let's say in the United States. And the CEO of Waymo, which is the leading autonomous vehicle maker right now, they're in the lead. The CEO said this year, or last year, autonomy will always have some constraints. And then the CEO of Luminar, which is LiDAR, which is part of autonomous vehicle technology, we're not even remotely close to being autonomous. So it is not around the corner unless you follow the executive director's advice and start thinking about it for micro-transit. Then it is around the corner. Now, the reason that you'll hear the industry say this is so important, it's because humans are responsible for 94% of fatalities. If that's the case, let's get rid of humans. I mean, that makes sense. Put the cars, but that is not a true statement, because it's a statement that was made 50 years ago. Also, here we cut the fatality rate by more than 50%. Again, the math doesn't work outright. In Sweden, they take a different approach. It's the same approach you take for pilots and aircraft. You allow for people being fallible. And when it comes to drivers, very fallible. They drink and drive. They make stupid decisions. They speed. They violate rules and regulations. It doesn't mean we should issue a death sentence for them, but worse, the people around them. So Sweden said, no, we're going to try to figure out how we can create a system in which we protect people from themselves, called Vision Zero. And in Sweden, the fatality rate plummeted 62% over the 20 years since they implemented it. The US rate is more than 4 times that of Sweden. So if we just had the Swedish rate, we would already be 80% of the way there. And they achieve it through design, through roadway design, through vehicle design, through education, through enforcement, through how certain attitudes we have with states. In terms of vehicle designs, this is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. You can see that certain technologies, like forward collision warning system with auto brake right in the center, can reduce fatalities and serious injuries by 50%. That technology is already here. So autonomous vehicles are going to rely mostly on technology that is already around. Why not advance that technology? And in fact, 40 countries agreed next year in this part of the United Nations, under the aegis of the United Nations, automatic emergency braking standard as soon as 2020. Only 2 countries dissented from that, the United States and China. So we're good company. You will also hear in the hype that self-driving is already safer. But the stats don't support that whatsoever. And I have been going around to the industry. I've gone to Detroit, I've gone out west, I've gone out here in New Jersey at Princeton. You have a wonderful autonomous vehicle center. And it turns out the casualty rate, or the number of crashes that autonomous vehicles get into, is a higher rate than general traffic so far when cars are autonomous mode. We know of 4 known fatalities. The record keeping is terrible. So the only place I can get some data from was the state of California. And if you look at the chart on the bottom, Google Waymo crashes every about 50,000 miles, if I could read that right, 55,000 miles. And number 2 is GM Cruise every 12,000 miles. Your conventional car gets into a crash every 500,000 miles or thereabouts. So we're not even close, but the data isn't being shared. But the hype will be, oh, we are safer than ever. Consumer Reports just had a bit on Tesla and how a lot of it was really hype, and you can't trust the data that's coming so far from industry on it. Now, switching passengers from cars to AVs with those safety features that I mentioned will save lives, but if we take them out of transit, we'll be increasing fatalities. And that's important for a region like this that has good transit usage. So cars, of course, are high up there in terms of fatality rates, 653 people per 100 billion passenger miles. But look at transit. Transit's way down. Even if AVs were 90% safer, transit's already 95% safer on a per mile basis on it. And if we spend more time in cars, and I know NJTPA cares about the health as well, and not just mobility, we increase our mortality rate. And if we look at inactivity deaths, now overtaking smoking as the single biggest killer on this planet, these are worldwide numbers, 5.3 million from inactivity and obesity deaths, and in motor vehicle crashes, too many, 1.35 million, but you could see its draw. So if you spend all your time in an autonomous vehicle, even if you think you're being safer in a crash, you may be increasing your mortality rate. And the other, that traffic will improve, This is not supported by any independent analysis. The industry will tell you that it will be improved. But when you look at the future, and even under the best circumstance where it's shared, it's not a glimpse into the future is by looking at what Uber, Lyft, Via, Juno get, and the others do now. The promise when they came around at the beginning of this decade, we will take people out of cars. And when you look at where they populate in cities, in the densest part of cities. Are they taking people out of cars? Well, in 2 cities, Boston, Denver, New York, it's a much lower number. It's a minority that come out of cars. Boston, 18%, Denver, 26%. But you can see they take people out of public transportation, walking, biking, carpooling, and others. The net result, more cars, more miles. And if you look at the very bottom, an app-based car travels 1.58 miles, 1.6 miles for each passenger mile. When that Uber comes to pick you up, it arrives empty, carries you somewhere, and then leaves empty. That's more miles traveled. And that is showing up in study after study. And don't believe this hype on road trains, that cars following each other closely can mimic that of public transportation. They don't even come close to a good busway or a good rail line. And life without driverless cars, life with driverless cars, not much different. The other thing I worry about are cities and towns, and you have lots of cities and towns in this area, and the belief is they will thrive, but not if we repeat the 20th century mistakes. The vibrancy that we're seeing, and when I hear this talk about complete streets and recognizing that people are part of the equation when we're doing planning as opposed to just vehicles, walkers are the oxygen of the city. That's what makes places exciting. But the problem is the AV industry can't figure out what a pedestrian's going to do next. This is from 2019 Toyota Camry's pedestrian detection system. If you're shorter, if you're a toddler or you're a basketball player, it may not detect you. Oversized clothing, large baggage. This is from their manual, pushing a stroller, wheelchair, in the dark. It would almost be humorous looking at all this if it wasn't sad. The technology isn't there, so this is what I worry about. And so I brought with me a visitor from the year 2100, who's, I can only talk to her. She's my granddaughter. She's 4 years old today. She's 85 years old in 2100, but she came to tell me, Grandpa, I know you talk to people about transportation. We have a real problem in the year 2100, and you change things. So she tells me how climate change has been devastating. Cities have collapsed. Transportation was a major factor in that. She said by 2030, walkers in cities slowed AV traffic to a crawl. They began to aim the traffic, knowing those vehicles would stop for them. So what happened? The industry and the cities and governments put in pedestrian fences, and pedestrians were treated like cattle. They can only walk if cattle gates were opened and then cross. And soon cities lost their vibrancy. So how do you do it right? And some of these things the executive director hit upon. First of all, you should sell rides, not cars, and integrate with transit, as I mentioned in the opening. You should get AV support for roads. Here in North Jersey, your roads need a lot of attention. There isn't enough money, even with the TIP program that you put forward, which is an excellent program. There isn't enough money to get your infrastructure in the shape that it needs. But the AV industry, this industry that's been valued by mid-century by Intel as over $7 trillion, they need your infrastructure. So how about now we start charging this nascent industry 10 cents per mile when an AV travels on it. So let them pay for this. Establish an AV typology plan, which you see a couple of photos below. If it's a car-free street, they can't go in it. It's a bikeway, they cannot go in it. If it's a slow street, it's got schools, they can't travel faster than the speed limits. The same thing on highways, they can go faster, but they must obey the rules and regulations. And I have a longer list on pricing, maintaining and supporting good mass transit, emphasize last mile. We talked a bit about equity and bike and ped growth. parking, you're going to need far less parking. So by the mid-2020s, when this group was assessing how much parking you need, I maintain you'll need less parking. So if you're looking at a plan for 2030, 2050, you will need less parking for that. Counterterrorism, I didn't get into that, but we need to do that and humanize street design. So that concludes my remarks on the book. If you'd like congestion pricing, happy to say a few words about that, but thank you very much. We'll take any questions.
I was going to say, don't go away.
Okay.
Any board members have any questions?
I have one question.
Yes.
My biggest concern is, you hit on it, at rural areas before. We face that whether you're talking AV vehicles, current transportation, or access to public transportation, that issue exists. And I'm still concerned, staring at my federal report later, I'm still concerned that there's barely enough funding in this moment to maintain what we have, let alone make a commitment, a serious commitment, to the improvement of transportation overall, which certainly incorporates some portion of baby technology. I don't know what your opinion is on that. In the rural areas, we'd like to have a train that's only a day.
Sure. So, first of all, as I mentioned, I think the industry should be contributing to transportation. They're going to rely on your system. The roads are the tracks. You expect them to rely on your system. When it comes to low-income areas, I think there's an opportunity with MicroTransit that, if done right, will not cost more. So imagine some lumbering bus service serving low-income people. It comes every 30 minutes or every hour, and it just comes along and is not terribly reliable. What if you replace that with 3 autonomous MicroTransit vehicles that can work on demand? And what if you got the transport workers unions to participate, so no jobs are lost, but triple the service is being offered? So that's one of the things. Rural areas are going to be about the last frontier for a few reasons. One, I don't see many people in rural areas yet, and I may be wrong, wanting to sign on to autonomous vehicles. But the same approach that I'm talking about for low-income areas could work in rural areas. But that will be probably the last frontier.
Chair?
Thank you very much. I'm with New Jersey Transit, and we're certainly looking at the idea of, I think, some of what you talked about in terms of an AV as a circulator, more robust trunk line transit. I appreciate your clarifying those issues. One thing that I think we've struggled with a little bit is thinking about the integration of these things over time, right? And the braking item that you talked about there, crystallized that for me. If half of the cars, a third of the cars, a quarter of the cars are equipped with those systems, what happens to the guy who's driving behind that car? You know, when these, for example, the automated braking happens like that, the car that's behind the curve may run into the car in front. Similarly with AVs, a lot of the issues we've seen is that it's not that you turn a switch and everyone's in the system. There's a ramp-up period where you've got a mix of human-driven cars and whatever level of autonomy you're talking about, an AV car. So how do you see that integration happening?
Okay, two really good points, and the first one is manifesting itself already. So when I talked about the crash rate, it's a higher crash rate for the autonomous vehicles. In many of those cases, it was other vehicles running into the autonomous vehicle. A typical one, a crash report I was looking at the other day, was in California. A car there's an autonomous vehicle, behind it 1,000 feet is a regular vehicle. The autonomous vehicle is exiting a freeway, going onto another freeway. And the conventional car is 1,000 feet behind. The autonomous vehicle is now on the acceleration lane, which would be 600 feet long. The conventional driver saw that car way ahead, isn't worried now because that guy must have gotten on, but in fact the autonomous vehicle was so hesitant it couldn't get on because of the algorithms. So the driver who's getting on crashed right into the rear of that. Yes, and the other part is you're going to see a 30-year period in which we have both autonomous vehicles, semi-autonomous vehicles, and conventional vehicles. And that's going to be a bit chaotic. And the last time we had that was 1900 to 1930, when we had horses and streetcars, and we had the cars. It was the deadliest period on America's roads on it. The second question, well, I'm sorry.
Well, it's similar in
Yeah.
terms of the ramp up. Okay, so how does the ramp up as AVs become more prevalent? If they aren't, how does that work?
Yeah, which is what I was talking about. It is going to be chaotic. Do we begin to dedicate some lanes and roadways to autonomous vehicles? One of the nice things about autonomous, and there are a number of nice things about autonomous vehicles, is they don't sway. They could be precise as if they're riding on tracks. So a lane that's 12 feet wide, if it's only a car lane, could be 7 feet wide. And suddenly you don't need more infrastructure to increase capacity. The real risk is, are you moving more people? Or are many of those cars empty, what I call zombie cars out there? But thank you for those questions.
Garrett?
Yeah, so you mentioned your granddaughter, 4 years old,
Yes.
and imagining 100 years into the future or 80 years into the future. I don't think we need to, I just want to know, like, we don't need to imagine that, right? You could just turn the news on and see cities destroyed from climate change today. And we're in an exponential growth of city destruction from climate change. So I just think everyone should be aware of that. So then my question is, how do you see industry impacting policy today related to autonomous vehicles? And clearly, industry helps write our rules pretty often. So can you give some examples of where that's happening?
Sure. And by the way, I travel around the country, around the world. Not everybody gets it. I'm James, so that's why I throw it in there. The industry is unbelievably active in this area. The industry has very powerful lobbyists. I urge all of you to look at a document that was released by the US DOT, I don't know if they're represented here, in October of 2018. And read that document yourself, but effectively the way I read it is what's good for AVs is good for America. And it said cities, states, tribal nations, and others get out of the way. And so for more than a century right now, states were able to control traffic. This is a reversal of states' rights the way that I read it. So the lobbyists, I have no doubt, had a big hand in getting this particular document from US DOT. US DOT is fighting, and the lobbyists are fighting, the state of California for reporting the data. It's the only state that is reporting data on crashes involving autonomous vehicles. They're trying to get them to stop reporting them. So are the lobbyists out there? Oh boy, are they out there. Are they spending money? A ton of money is being spent. That's why NJTPA and others need to get together to say, no, we would like to control our destiny, our roads, our transit systems. We don't want somebody saying we have no right to control our systems when for 120 years it has been states' rights.
I wasn't looking at this side. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Hi, Barbara Patel from Jersey City. You put forth a few policies and steps that cities or people in the public sector can take in driverless future. Have you seen any cities doing that are farther along than this part of the country?
There are some cities, particularly on the West Coast, that are at least starting to write the plans for an autonomous future. Seattle is probably in the lead there. San Francisco is working on it, but you can imagine with autonomous vehicles are almost headquartered there. There is a lot of pushback. Los Angeles is beginning to look at it as well. I haven't seen too much on the East Coast. My home city, New York, I don't see much work in this area in trying to get ready for an autonomous future. That's why I applaud you today for putting this on the agenda and for talking, and the future of transportation is part of your agenda. So proceed, and maybe you will be in the lead. There isn't a lot of competition at the moment.
One more question. You showed that graph for MicroTransit and services like Lyft and Uber, but also Via, which or other companies like that, which prioritize the shared nature of the ride. But you're saying that in the cities where they operate, that's not exactly what's happening. Is that correct?
Yeah, except for Via. So let me leave Via off for a second. Uber Pool, Lyft Line, all that you know and get are not pooling very many passengers. It's still dominated by the single passenger. Via is doing something interesting around the country and around the world. It started in the New York area, 7-person vehicles. They're now doing the last mile in Seattle in an outer area. They're in, and you'll have to check, but I believe they're in more than 100 areas around the world doing this and offering those services. They're kind of number one in MicroTransit. I was so sorry to see Ford Chariot suddenly, disappear. I had great hopes of Chariot. Via is a 7-person vehicle or 8-person vehicle. Chariot was a 15-person vehicle. Bridge, which was another company that also went under. So far, MicroTransit companies haven't succeeded. It was also 14 or 15. It was in Boston. It was in Washington, D.C. That's where I would love the industry to spend its time and energy. So far, Via is the only one that seems to at least still be alive, and I haven't heard of too many others.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Yes, well, any of the new full autonomous vehicles. Oh, sorry. Do you see any of the new autonomous vehicles that will be fully autonomous still retain the feature of allowing a driver to switch around, like we do with cruise control, for example? If they see a situation that they may not see the AV features completely safe, will the driver still have the option to go on manual control?
A number of companies are aiming to not have that. Waymo and a few others, I think Zoox. Right now, there is always a person. When you hear there's an autonomous vehicle out there, there is a person at the controls. There is a brake, there is a steering wheel, there is an accelerator if you need to do that. But in a future, one of the futures, there won't be any of that. In another one of the future with that, driving won't be allowed. It's interesting in the document that was put out in October by US DOT, it essentially said, despite everything we said about autonomous vehicles, driving is a freedom, practically one of the Bill of Rights freedoms, almost read to me. And it will never be taken away. Americans will always have the right to drive. There is already a movement of drivers who don't want their rights taken away, so people are wary of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.